Welcome everybody to another episode of CLRD Money. It's a show where we discuss and we make finance really simple. We discuss really cool, interesting, and relevant topics. And we've got an especially relevant topic today. Today we're discussing COVID vaccine passport. Yikes. Before we get into that, I just want to get the formalities out the way. Like, subscribe, click on that little notification symbol so that you know exactly when we're having our shows. We intend on having shows every Thursday, 8 p.m. So please tune in. More importantly, please comment on the live feed. We had such amazing engagement last week with all the comments and the questions. We'll try pop up some questions onto screen. We'll try answer questions live. So please just keep the engagement going. Every week we have a guest on, and this week we've got Ian. Ian, I'm gonna give you 1 minute. Can you please just introduce yourself? Let us know what you're about, and then we'll jump into the show.
Sure. Hi everybody. Thanks for the invitation. It's good to be here. I've had multiple careers, ranging from being a sports writer to a consultant at a Big Four firm. These days, I've got a toe in academia, and I consult privately on essentially narrative economics to firms, helping them use narrative to raise money, keep money, etc. I'm not a COVID expert like most. My ire was piqued by lockdowns, and it's been further piqued by vaccine mandates, not vaccines, vaccine mandates. And so I sort of by accident got embroiled in the controversy. And so yeah, it'll be good to chat and hear your guys' thoughts as well.
Awesome. Welcome, Ian. Thank you for joining the show. Super excited to discuss this topic and to pick your brain a bit. So I think let's get into it. We want to discuss COVID vaccine passports. What is it? How does that impact you and I? From a social, economic perspective, how does that impact how we interact with each other, how we go to work, how we just do general daily activities? That's sort of some of the points that we're looking to discuss. I think before we get into all that fluff and all that detail, I just got one question, Ian. I'm gonna chuck this question to you. What is a COVID vaccine passport in layman's terms?
Well, I suppose it's a COVID mandate and a COVID vaccine passport are one and the same. I can't think of a material difference. It's somebody, be it a corporate, a government body, or similar, demanding that you take the COVID vaccine in order to do something. In the corporate space, it tends to be to keep your job, mandating a medical treatment on pain of dismissal.
Okay.
It can also be much broader. The big governmental ones they're looking at now would essentially be on pain of removing you from general life. You couldn't go to, I think New York has gone this way. In fact, you can't go to an indoor restaurant, a theater, you name it. It removes you essentially from public life.
So what
we've seen that in a lot of, sorry, Shaq, we've just seen that in a lot of the European countries as well. And I mean, I think Saudi Arabia, they've come down quite hard on what they're allowing the citizens to do, those that are vaccinated versus unvaccinated. I mean, Greece and France have come down quite hard on what they're allowing and not allowing as well. Sorry, Shaq.
And that's something I actually want to sort of delve into a bit more, right? So we get what the COVID vaccine passport is, right? It's some sort of record or evidence or proof to show that an individual has received a vaccine, right? Whether that be the single dose J&J or whether it be the 2-shot Pfizer. and it just shows and has proof, whether that be paper proof or digital, however it works. I'm not too sure, but it's evidence that you've received the vaccine, right? So my next question is, how can government or some controlling body, how can they use that evidence or that piece of paper to change our daily lives, how we interact with each other, how we go to work? Just from a general layman's terms, how could it potentially affect us? I think, Brandon, let's maybe start with you.
We should first see the reason or why governments or those regulatory bodies are saying that the vaccine passport or the mandates are needed. And they're saying it's needed because that's going to help, number one, save lives, and number two, get everyone back to working. So they're saying the economic impact of taking or having the COVID passport is that it will allow people to get back to what we were doing pre-COVID, get the economy moving back to pre-COVID levels. I'm not talking just South Africa. I'm talking, this is sort of like this global standpoint. And this is the reason we keep hearing that this is why you need the passport, so that you can get back into the office, I can get back into the office, you can get the subways running, you can get the taxis going, you can sort of just get economies flowing and going. So I think it's just important that we need to remember that that's the reason we're getting told why you need the COVID vaccine, also the COVID passport. So, and when you tell someone that who doesn't have a job or might have lost their job because of COVID, now you're telling them, well, if you get the passport, you're going to get your job back. People think and look differently when they're hungry. When you don't have a job and you don't know where your next paycheck's going to come from, you're looking at things in a completely different lens. So I think a lot of the time that's where the governments, and I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist here, but I think they prey on those, can I call it insecurities maybe, or that they prey on the lack that a person has. So I think it's just something we must keep in the back of our heads.
Ian, what's your thoughts on that? Do you think what government is telling us is necessarily, what will turn into fruition, or do you think there's potentially a subplot to that?
Look, I think we've got to be careful about the slippery slope argument there. But perhaps let me start with the fundamental that I think we keep missing. And this is the burden of proof. The burden of proof is not on us to say we don't need a vaccine mandate or passport. The status quo, protected by norms and by the international treaty and indeed the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. This all protects the status quo. Protected, if we go to the Bill of Rights, freedom of movement, the right to earn a living, privacy, bodily integrity, etc. So the burden of proof, it sounds a bit unfair, but this is not a sort of UN-style debate. It sounds unfair, but the burden of proof is entirely on those who want to introduce a vaccine mandate. On governments, I do think that I think governments, the more power, the better for a government. And I think they have quite enjoyed and leapt at the opportunity. Maybe not enjoyed. Nobody's enjoyed this, but I think they've leapt at the opportunity. They've seen a chance to have more power, and more is better. I think for many politicians.
Better for the governments. Better for the governments. Yeah.
Yes, more is better. Indeed, yes. And so I do worry about making the slippery slope argument, but I think if we look at the process we've gone through, it was 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and it's progressively got more and more severe. And at each stage, the next stage has been typically deemed a conspiracy theory. Vaccine passports won't happen, and step by step, it has tended to happen. So I think we're setting precedents that allow governments to go further and allow corporates to go further.
Interesting. Whoops, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, so you touched on our constitutional rights to own, basically make a decision for our own body, right? Does that outweigh the constitutional right of the masses to feel like they are in a safe environment, though? I mean, that's the argument being used by many leaders of large corporates in South Africa, and I think that is what they are the ones that are putting pressure on government to actually pass or create a COVID passport.
Yeah, that's key. That's key. Good point. Yes, so I think there is that right. There is the right to a safe workplace, which is what Adrian Gore at Discovery has highlighted, and others. And yes, you have that right. But every right, including those in the Constitution, can be justifiably limited, right? So even the right to life. If somebody's shooting at me, I have the right to shoot back, for example. Not that I would know what to do with a gun.
Don't lie here.
Firstly, again, the burden of proof is on those who want the mandate to demonstrate that the right to safety at work, in this context, justifiably limits multiple constitutional rights, and these are a high burden. These are not just a common law or regular legislation. This is a high burden, and it's multiple rights as well: bodily integrity, privacy, to earn a living, even dignity. I think would come up. The Constitutional Court seems to be very on the front foot with dignity. They use it heavily in the death sentence case, Macleod. So again, the burden is there, and it's for he who alleges to prove. Here I go back to the data, and I think firstly, starting point, the infection fatality rate is very different across ages and level of health, and dare I say it, in cases minuscule. If you're young and healthy, I don't think it's a big enough risk to worry about. It becomes a different story if you're older and have a comorbidity.
But surely we've seen, sorry to break your word, but with regards to the Delta variant that's being at play right now, I'm not too sure what the stats say, but there have been news reports saying that majority of the people that have been affected are of a younger age. And the younger age group is
with no
by the Delta variant.
comorbidities.
Yeah, with no comorbidities.
Still
I'm not sure. Are you aware of the stats, Rieyaan, or not?
Look, on my reading, it still doesn't cause worse than the flu, right? Morbidity is still infinitesimally low. And then we've got to get down into the detail of which part of the effectiveness is relevant. So I think most people are pretty in agreement that there's at least substantial benefits in terms of limiting severe illness, hospitalization, and death. The one caveat there is how long it lasts, right? The effectiveness does seem to wane quite substantially over weeks and months. But I think the most important type of effectiveness for the vaccine is whether I can get the virus and give it. And there's the conflicting evidence. I think far too many people are saying it works. There's evidence from quality sources that shows that, in fact, in certain places for certain ages, there's a spell where the vaccine makes it more likely you'll get it. And I'll have these references in the piece I published on Friday. I think there's some in my last one as well. But Public Health England data from week 32 to 35, I think was age groups 40 to 79. More people who were vaccinated, fully vaccinated, contracted the virus over that spell than people who were unvaccinated. Again, there is conflicting data that shows across the age groups effectiveness at preventing the virus. but there are several examples that public health is just one. And so I think in this case where it's a big issue with immense impact on everybody's lives, and remember the burden of proof is on he who alleges, there's enough evidence to suggest this is not right.
Yeah, I think most people, and I agree. There's a whole bunch of evidence out there, right? But the layman either doesn't have access to that information or that data, or doesn't have the ability to actually process that data and make an informed decision on all of that, right? So I mean, doctors, the news, government, everyone's telling us that the vaccine is sort of the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's our best chance of sort of getting out of lockdown and having to bear this burden of lockdown and restrictions, right? If we're saying that the COVID vaccine passport is not, in fact, the light at the end of the tunnel, you know, what is the thinking around, you know, alternatives? How do we actually get out of this?
Let me address that first point of yours, public perception, and you know, people's ability to comprehend numbers. Part of my work in narrative is that people invest in narratives. They look at the data, but that's almost a side issue. We invest in narratives. We're a storytelling people. Here's a small example. When someone tells you something is 80% effective, quite often in the scope of COVID, it's 80% of 0.03%. And this is something I implore Adrian Gore to do in his 6-part rationale. He'll say this thing is 80% effective at doing this, or 70 or 65. That sounds great, but for context, it may be 65% of 0.2%.
A smaller percentage, yeah.
And people either just don't pick that up and dive in enough, or they just aren't good with that. Public perception, I've pulled up a whole lot of numbers. Again, this is out on Friday. People, based on survey data, people in both directions vastly overthink things or overestimate things. And it varies by political affiliation, which is terrible. So in many of these studies, for example, on a sample of British residents, vastly overestimate the chance of dying from COVID if you're under 65. You know, it's orders of magnitude. People don't quite appreciate that almost all deaths, not almost deaths, the vast majority are over 65, and if you're in fact under 19 and healthy, it's practically zero. Again, if you look at certain populations in the US, some people go the other way based on politics. Certain questions of Republicans, one subset believed that the flu was more deadly across ages than COVID-19. So yeah, the public perception, I think, has been terrible. And I think part of it is the media, and even I find a lot of people who prior to... I
think the mistrust of governments and politicians as well.
Everyone. I think many people who prior to late 2019 would never have imagined giving medical advice. And I am ruthlessly careful not to give medical advice. I think if you're saying to a friend, a colleague, an employee, get the vaccine, it's the right thing to do, you're giving medical advice. And I think even doctors who tiptoe into this area on social media and say, get the vaccine, I think you're okay, and in fact duty bound to do that in private with a patient. In public, you're entitled completely to say, here's a study, it shows this, and that's my interpretation. But I think that even for a doctor to say, take the vaccine universally, I don't think is right either.
I agree with you 100%, because that's exactly what I was saying earlier off air, was when we were saying, you know, it's the same in the financial world, because I can sit here, or Bobs can sit here and say, MTN's a great company, go and buy the share. But I mean, he knows nothing about your risk profile. He knows zero about the amount of money that you've got to invest. He doesn't know what your background is, yet he gives you that advice. So
yeah. I
completely agree with the doctors, but the doctors are selling it. And I understand doctors are experts, but experts at what? Are they COVID experts? Because how can you be a COVID expert at it? It takes, people say it takes, what is it, like 7,000 or 10,000 hours to become an expert at something? So have you been studying COVID for long enough? Have you done the studies yourself? What journals have been published that lead to your expertness?
So here's the way I see this. One of my little catchphrases: everything is multivariate. And I go back to here. There's a wonderful old economics essay back when intellectuals wrote essays. It's called I Pencil, and essentially it goes through the process of making a pencil, and it looks at growing the trees, transporting the paint, the graphite, etc. To cut a long story short, it concludes that there's not a single person, alive or dead, who understands how to make a pencil. It's too complex, and that's just a pencil. Now, when you're making policy around COVID-19, there are essentially infinite inputs and outputs. So even if you're the most fantastically qualified virologist, you're not an expert on childhood education, psychology, economy, economics, and the list goes on and on. And that takes me back to the burden of proof. Burden of proof is with whoever wants to change the status quo. And I think far too many people have said we must lock down, based perhaps on expertise in one area. Very few people can have expertise in one area, even fewer in two. But in fact, much like the pencil, not a single person alive is an expert on whether we should lock down for COVID.
No, spot on. I mean, there's varying opinions. As soon as this pandemic hit, my timeline was filled with newly qualified doctors on Twitter, claiming to know exactly how this virus operates and how it plays out and what's the solution to all our problems. And I think that's one of the big problems we have in today's society. Everyone wants to have an opinion, and everyone is confident in making very absolute statements, even when they don't know the full picture. I think before we move on to the next point, sorry, Brandon, just one more.
I just want to quickly bring up something as well. It just goes back to the point Ian was saying is, so Adrian Gore's 6-point program of protecting people in the workplace, you've got a right to be protected. My question then goes back, and this is specifically South Africa, right, is the taxi industry is, there's no, allowed to be, was a 75% full, yet they're probably all 120% full on a daily basis, right? So you've got people sitting in a 16-seater combi right next to each other, squashed, with maybe their masks on. Now, how many of them have the vaccine, how many don't, I don't know. But now you're saying that, what about their lives? So now, are they going to carry a passport to be able to get onto a taxi? Because surely that's more dangerous than me walking into my workplace where you can sit 2 meters apart from each other. You know what I'm saying? So for me, and again, controversial, but I don't mind being controversial, is this goes to agendas. And I really believe that there are agendas driving, not just locally in South Africa, I think there's agendas globally and driven by not just politicians, but business, certain business interests, certain business people. And I think that's, when the crux comes down to it, that's where the investigations need to be done, because that's where the truth needs to come out. It just, there's a lot of stuff, and I mean, we can talk about the lockdowns, so much of it doesn't make sense. I don't know, man, there's so many questions out there that haven't been answered.
Look, I might, sorry to break your word, Shaq. I mean, I might be the only person in the chat here that actually thinks the lockdowns worked to keep people safe. The data obviously might not show that. I don't know what the data says. This is just speaking from personal opinion. But unfortunately, the side effect of the lockdowns is that the economies all around the world is probably taken a knock, and that's probably caused more harm than COVID itself. More financial harm to individuals. People have lost their job, and comes back to what you mentioned earlier on, Brandon, where you said people have lost their job because of COVID and the lockdowns. And I think that companies are now starting to feel the pinch as well. Big businesses are starting to feel the pinch. South Africa in emerging markets, like we touched on in episodes before, we don't necessarily print money like the US, where the US have printed money and they can stimulate those companies, they can fund those companies through the pandemic. And that is why we're probably seeing a big drive amongst large organizations in emerging markets, but putting pressure on their governments to actually come up with a COVID passport so that we can open up the economy again, so that we can get rid of lockdowns. I mean, that's, yeah. I don't know, Shaq, you want to take some questions maybe now?
Yeah, I think let's take a quick question. Here's a question from Abu. What economic opportunities will arise from the pandemic? Boobs, I'll let you have a stab at this.
What economic opportunities? Oh, geez, I'm not too sure.
I mean, the first example is masks, right? I mean, I know
that's what I was about to say.
Started selling masks and hand sanitizer, right? I think it's creating a whole bunch of opportunities, and will continue.
You know, but I think the big opportunity the big opportunity that's been taken advantage of by Big Pharma. We can't ignore the fact that COVID has brought the opportunity of vaccinations for Big Pharma. Big pharmaceutical companies are banking billions. I don't know if it's trillions, but billions of dollars with these vaccinations, and that in itself speaks to what Brandon said. There's maybe another agenda. Get your vaccination passport. We will sell. The governments have paid or are paying for these vaccinations. They obviously need to get it out, because what's the point? They're not going to be able to hold the stock and for nothing and do nothing with it. So for me, the biggest economic opportunity that's come from the pandemic are the vaccinations themselves, that Big Pharma have benefited mostly from.
No, spot on. To the viewers, please keep sending your questions through. We'll be taking a few more before the end of the show. I just want to move on to sort of a different angle to this, and I suppose I'll aim this question to Ian. A few years ago, I traveled to Lagos, right? And I was not allowed to go in unless I had my yellow fever vaccine certificate with me, right? I was going there for business. You know, I had to get the yellow fever vaccine. I went ahead, I got the yellow fever vaccine, and I was allowed in, right? What would you say to someone who argues that, you know, vaccination passports is not a new thing? It's just something that, you know, has been applied. We see it with the yellow fever vaccine. We see children not being able to attend certain schools if they don't have certain vaccinations, you know, and it prohibits certain actions, right? So how do we get our heads around that in the COVID vaccination, you know, passport perspective?
Yeah, it's a good one. I've had the yellow fever in order to travel. I had no real, I don't think I liked it, but I had no real concern. I think two points come to mind. One is that the yellow fever shot there's no controversy about effectiveness and safety. I think it's well established. Nobody questions that. On the COVID vaccines, as an absolute necessity, there's no long-term data. There just isn't. We haven't had enough time. Short-term data, the risks do seem pretty small. The effectiveness, again, modest, I would say, for protecting against symptoms, hospitalization, death, especially given that it wanes over weeks and months, and that reduction is quite rapid, I would suggest. As for preventing transmission, again, as I said earlier, I think going by number of studies, it seems to show it helps. But again, there are, I think I've pulled out 3 studies from reasonable sources that show, in fact, there are circumstances, timelines, and ages when, in fact, it's a damaging input. Place is important. It's one thing to check a passport at a national border. Checking it to enter a theatre, taxi, business, shop, museum, restaurant is another. Restaurants, as we know, operate on an unbelievably thin margin. If you have to employ someone or take a worker's time to sit and check vaccines and take temperatures, and even worse nowadays, limiting your seating. Restaurant at 50% capacity, I wouldn't want to own a restaurant anytime, but if you're at 50% capacity, I don't know how any of them make money if they are. Yeah,
and I think that's probably why we're seeing such a big drive and push by the hospitality industry. They're very pro the vaccine passport, because they know that, or they feel that if majority of the population are vaccinated and have this vaccine passport, I mean, their pockets will be a bit easier, if I could say that, you know.
Yeah.
But I think Brooks, the reason hospitality is pushed or agreeing with it is they've had no help from government.
Yeah.
So through lockdown, there was no payout towards, the likes of Sun International, the Sorbo Suns, the big casinos, the city lodges, the Airbnbs. I mean, if you have an Airbnb, government wasn't paying you money for your Airbnb. So
but that's in South Africa only. I mean, where government hasn't necessarily supported.
It'll be globally that the tourism industry would be taking. Hospitality industry would be taking that sort of stance, because none of those guys were getting paid out.
But globally, in certain in other countries, were they not funded a bit better by their governments and supported a bit better by their governments? I mean, European.
Go have a look at the occupancy of the hotels, the hotel sector globally.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. I'm not disputing that. I'm sure it's been terrible and putrid across the world.
Then go have a look at the balance sheets, the income statements. Have a look at the results that the guys have come out with in the States. Guys aren't paying dividends anymore. Guys are keeping cash. There's so many rights issues happening in the hospitality sector. If they were getting paid out enough, they wouldn't need to do that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the fact that they're having to do this, the fact that the results are so bad, just proves to me that globally they haven't been funded perhaps as well as other sectors. That's number one. Number two is they are dependent. The hospitality industry is dependent on tourism, highly dependent on tourism. So if you're locking the borders, you're not going to get tourism. If the planes are grounded, you're not going to get tourism. So it flows into each other, it flows into the next one. But I think
which all supports the statement as to why I said that the hospitality industry are pro the vaccine passport. Hospitality and tourism industry alike are pro that, because they need the borders to open up. They need tourism to open up. Yeah, exactly.
But I reckon that's why I think they're pro it, is because of that. If you look at, so for example, recently Sun City, Anthony Leeming of Sun City said they're not going to open up Sun City because government locked down Gauteng. So he said, well, cool, I'm locking down Sun City. So there's jobs, 4,000 jobs gone. Cheers. Now government says, well, okay, cool, there's a passport. Get your guys vaccinated. Get the country, go out on social media, punt the passport, and you know what, we'll open up so you can open up Sun City again. The guy's going to say, cool, I'll do whatever it takes.
Yeah. There's also been the perverse result in the US where the payments individuals who've been furloughed and lost their jobs have been so, I don't want to say so big, but they've been substantial enough that McDonald's now can't hire people at $15 an hour. So that's been one of the perverse results of, for me, as an Austrian school leaning economist, government intervening and trying to control the economy has these perverse results.
Yeah, I'm just cognizant of time, Boobs. I know we want to keep the show within 40 minutes, but I can't end the show without throwing you guys in the hot seat. So I'm going to ask the panel today on a scale of 1 to 10, right? 1 being there's no way I want this COVID vaccine passport to ever be a reality. 10 being, I want it implemented right now. Where do you put yourself on that scale, and sort of what are the key drivers to why you put yourself on that scale? And I'm happy to go first. I'll put myself in the hot seat. I'll probably give it a 6, right? I wouldn't say I'm 50-50. I'm leaning more to pro COVID vaccine passport. I think the main driver for being a 6 is I just don't know enough. I think Cyril Ramaphosa needs to come out and just give us more detail as to what does this entail and what does it actually mean? How does it impact us? And partly also just lockdown fatigue, right? As a millennial, I'm in my 20s, there's certain activities I want to be out doing. I want to be traveling. I want to go to concerts and parties. And I feel like lockdown has robbed me of 2 years of my 20s, right? And I know a lot of millennials my age, have the same sort of sentiment. And it's kind of like, okay, what is the solution? Give us the solution. And I know that is a problematic way of approaching it, and we should give it enough thought and use the data and the evidence to make an informed decision. But we are human beings, and a lot of times emotions do govern the decisions we make. So that's sort of the key drivers, as while I'll probably give it a 6, until we get more information from Uncle Cyril. I'm on the fence for now. Brandon?
Let me go last.
Ian, let's go.
I'm going to stick to my guns as a narrative guy and not give you a number, but to say I am vehemently opposed to vaccine mandates, not vaccines, vaccine mandates. And perhaps just to finish off, one question that I think can be illustrative here is compared to what? Vaccine mandates and the problems they come with. One of them being, in fact, some evidence emerging now that vaccine mandates contribute to vaccine hesitancy and even anti-vax sentiment. If it's a good thing, why are they forcing them? But compared to what? Look at the UK, where indeed they have had some passports of sorts, but not a universal one by any means. They're up in all of the home nations above 90% antibodies, be that from prior infection or a vaccine. So compared to what? Compared to people getting it based on good information and encouragement and availability. And one thing I think that's been sorely lacking, encouraging sport, health, eating right. That's really a powerful defense that I think corporates and governments in particular have been sorely lacking in addressing. So yeah, in short, vehemently opposed to vaccine passports by corporates or governments.
Cool. Folks?
Yeah, I think I'm also on the fence. I mean, if you had asked me 2 days ago, I would have said I'm completely opposed to vaccine mandates and vaccine passports. After doing a bit more research on it, I think that I'd probably be for vaccine passport for international travel, specifically when it comes from with countries like South Africa, where we have the potential to have mutated variants. I mean, if you want to go to another country, I think it's quite important that we do have a vaccine passport. But completely opposed against vaccine mandates for people having to go to certain events or needing a vaccine passport to go to the workplace as well. I think that's not fair. That's the only way I can put it. Everybody should have the right to at least have the same what's the word I'm looking for, to have the same pleasantries, if I can say that, as any other person in society. Yeah, that's just where I stand on it.
Cool. Brandon, you can't run now. You know, I see.
I'm a one.
You are one. What's driving that? What's
For
driving
me,
that?
For me, you can. What's wrong with getting a COVID test to be able to comes back negative? You can travel overseas. Why do you need a passport for that if you want to travel overseas? To have a mandate for a passport to go to a shopping center or a restaurant, nah. Can I tell you why? I put it on my Facebook earlier the week. Is in when was it? Not long ago, we had a system called apartheid that did something similar, that forced people to carry a book, and it discriminated people based on race. This is going to discriminates based on whether you are pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine. Throughout history, we've seen dictators, leaders, tyrants start with things that sounded good, that they made it out to sound like this is going to solve the problem. Hitler made it out that the Jews were the issue, and if the Jews were out of the picture, Germany would essentially be an economic powerhouse. So for me, I'm not taking a person's freedoms away. Is when you fought decades and decades and centuries for freedoms, now we just get back to the point of saying, well, there you go, take my freedom away. Makes no sense to me.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining tonight's show. I think it was a really healthy debate. I think we received perspectives for both sides of the coin. I think people who are watching need to, at the end of the day, make a decision for themselves based on information which they either get from the channel or online or research. But it's important to really make an informed decision, whichever way you sort of leaning. Thank you to the OGs of the channel, Boobs and Brandon, and to our guest tonight, Ian. Thank you for joining. You really gave us
Thanks, guys. It was fun.
really awesome insights and perspectives on a topic which a lot of us are not experts in, and we actually don't even know how to approach thinking about it. So you really guided us on the right way. To everyone watching, like, subscribe. Next week Thursday, 8 p.m. Be back right here. If we've missed your question, we'll try get your question offline and try to reply to any questions we might have missed. Thank you for tuning in tonight, and we'll catch you guys next week. Bye,
Awesome.
everyone.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks
Thanks,
everyone.